Hello, my name is Sharon Downs, and I'm the director for the Disability Resource Center at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. I've been asked to speak with you today to talk about some policies and practices that our university has put in place over the last decade or so to help make our campus more welcoming and more accessible to all students. So these are my people up on the screen. We have a wonderful team of people who work together collaboratively to help meet the goals of our department. First of all, I'd like to talk with you about what disability even means. Most of us think about disability in terms of what the Americans with Disabilities Act states. And you know what I'm talking about here. A mental or physical impairment, limits one or more activities of daily living, major activities of daily living, that definition. Well, when you go with that definition, you have a very medical perspective about what disability is. And when you have that perspective, the obvious response is for the university's disability office to be completely responsible for access on a college campus, for example. Because disabled students have special needs and you need a department who can respond to those needs, right? Well, I would challenge you to think about some of the language that I just used. For instance, special needs. I still hear that phrase a lot. And here's my problem with it. People with disabilities do not have any special needs. They have the same needs that everybody else does. They have a need for inclusion. They have a need for access. They have a need for socializing. They have a need for collaboration. They have a need for education. And that is the role of the entire university and not just the disability office. So I'm going to be challenging you to really change your framework of thinking about disability and how we as universities respond to disability. What that means is I'm challenging you to look at disability through a very different lens. And I like this slide a lot, the puppy dog with the Coke bottle glasses. And hopefully that'll stick in your mind. It's a lens with which we look through that determines how we respond, how we act. So for the purposes of this discussion, let's put the Americans with Disabilities Act definition aside. Let's don't even think about it at all. We're going to look at a completely different way of thinking about disability. The way the ADA describes disability is a very medical model perspective. That's not at all the perspective that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the socio-political or socio-cultural view of disability. And in that view of disability, we look at it as an aspect of one's diversity, just like a person's gender, just like a person's sexual orientation, their race, their religion, their ethnicity, their identity, their gender identity. So it's just another aspect of one's diversity. The medical model is very deficiency-based. It's based on the fact that there's something about the person that's not working. This model is not at all deficiency-based. It's a holistic approach. Because let's face it, 1 in 5 Americans have a disability. So there's nothing abnormal about it. It is a normal part of the human condition. It is just an aspect of who we are. It's part of our diversity. When we think about disability in those terms, disability really becomes value neutral, meaning it's not a negative thing. It's not a positive thing. It just is. It's an aspect of who we are. When we look at it through that lens, how we respond to it becomes a lot more clear in my mind. We can put our focus where it needs to be on the fact that environments are designed with not everybody in mind. That's the focus of the disability offices on campus and the entire university. So to convey those values, our department has gone through several changes in terminology and labels that we use to describe ourselves. Probably the most prominent is we changed the department name. For a long time we were called Disability Support Services. And we didn't like the feel of that. It had that medical feel to it. And so we changed it to Disability Resource Center, which is becoming more and more popular around the country. And we like that term because it conveys the reality of what we do. We are a resource to the entire campus, students of course, but also faculty, staff, administrators, visitors, alumni. So it better conveys the scope of what we do and gets away from sending that message, however unintentional, that students require our support, which really implies that they can't get their education without us, which we know is not true. Another thing that we have changed is the first meeting that we have with students. For a long time we called it intake, but again, that's a very medical term. And there's a real power differential there in the term intake. If you think about being in an intake with a physician, who has the power in the room? Who's the expert? It's the doctor, of course. Well, that's not the kind of environment that we want to foster at our university. We want to foster a collaborative, equal relationship with students. So we changed it to a value-neutral term, new student appointment. Another is what our staff are called. We no longer call them counselors. We changed it to access consultants because that felt like a better descriptor of what they do. Also, when we talk about the focus of our department, we don't talk about students needing help with accommodations. That's not the focus at all. Now the focus is on identifying the barriers that students experience that our university has put up for them. And that's a funny way of saying it, I know. It's a funny way of thinking about it if you're new to this line of thinking. But barriers are artificial constructs that are put up by people. So when a student experiences a barrier in the environment, it's not just happenstance that it's there. It's something that the university has erected and the university needs to take down. And I'll give you some examples. We look at requests for accommodations really as Band-Aids, because what do Band-Aids do? They address the symptom of the problem, but they don't address the source of the problem. The symptom of the problem is the fact that a student is needing to request an accommodation. The source of the problem is that there's a barrier to their inclusion somewhere in the environment. That barrier is what we need to address. If we just focus on the accommodation, we're missing the big picture. We like to look at requests for accommodations as a signpost that there's something in the environment that needs to be fixed. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. The way people think about accommodations is that the issue resides in the fact that the student has a certain condition. That's not the case at all. The barrier is there because of how the environment is designed. So for example, when I went to school, I loved taking tests. I'm one of those strange people who loves taking tests. I like to see if I can beat my last score. I like to see if I can be the first one to finish. I love time tests. I thrive in that environment. Well, if I were to be a professor in a class, I might think time tests are the way to go. They're awesome. But again, that would be short-sighted of me because not everybody learns the same way that I learn. Not everybody likes to be evaluated the same way that I like to be assessed. So a really poor design would be for a course to get all its points from time tests because some students have a real barrier with that. You need to think about other options for students so they can demonstrate what they know other than taking a test. That's just one example. Let's do some more. When a student requests large print handouts, we could respond with an accommodation and provide large print handouts. But instead, a much more effective way to approach that is to talk to the professor about providing handouts in an accessible format from the beginning. So rather than handing out 12-point font paper to everyone in class, for instance, the professor could post the notes in a digital format in their course management system. So everyone could access it the same way, and if someone needed it large print, they could easily enlarge it. Another example would be the use of a laptop in class. For some students, handwriting notes is just not possible or practical. But rather than having a laptop being an accommodation, we could get faculty to start thinking about the fact that all students might benefit from bringing their laptop into class to take notes because you can get more notes that way. So you're not having to do something different for the student with a disability. And another one is screen reader compatibility. With a screen reader, you have to post items in an accessible way. So again, rather than the professor waiting to get a notification of that accommodation, just have the professor start designing all the materials in an accessible way. That way when the student signs up for the class, nobody has to do anything differently. It's already designed with that student in mind. So how does this translate to working with deaf and hard of hearing students? Well, of course, the primary accommodation for those students is a sign language interpreter or a transcriber. And of course, we can't proactively have an interpreter and transcriber in every class in case there's a deaf student who shows up. Of course not. We have to schedule classes with the resources that we have for coursework. However, there are a lot of other ways that we can be completely proactive. For instance, if your university has speakers come in, like a public speaker lecture series, instead of waiting to see if anyone deaf shows up, go ahead and plan to have it covered with an interpreter. I know there's cost associated with that, but what it does is it sends a very welcoming message to the campus that deaf students and deaf professors are welcome here. Another very common accommodation is notes. Again, the accommodation approach would be to find someone who could take notes for the student. Instead, work with faculty to see if they can design their course to take care of that from the get-go. So for instance, have the professor post his or her own notes to the course management system every day. All students in the class can benefit from those notes, and then nothing different has to be done for the deaf student. And caption videos, that's a biggie. We all know caption videos take a while to produce, or time and money to have them produced for us. Instead, try to set a culture on your campus where professors only use caption videos. You can show TED Talks, for instance, and a lot of media is out there already captioned. So just don't even make it an option that professors choose from non-captioned materials. It is a real paradigm shift, of course, and we can't tell professors what to do, but we can certainly make those suggestions so that when they have a deaf student, again, they don't have to do anything differently. What I've described takes time and resources. And you may be thinking, there's no time to add into your schedule, and I understand how that feels. But here's what we did in our department. We decided every person on staff needed to have some proactive, pre-planning type activities that they could be involved in. So it could, number one, increase the accessibility of the campus proactively, and number two, improve job satisfaction. Because if you spend all of your time just putting out fires, it's kind of exhausting, isn't it? So we set it up this way. We have 3 access consultants. One person is in charge of programming, which are the cultural events that happen on campus, to make sure that they're a consultant to the campus on design of those, to make sure that everything is designed well from the beginning. We have an access consultant who's over technology, so all the adaptive technology and IT needs for the campus. He is the consultant for that. And we have an access consultant over facilities, the built environment. And so he sits on committees whenever there's construction or new buildings going up. And our sign language interpreters, of course, are liaisons to the campus for all communication-related access issues. And I, as the director, am the liaison for the campus for policy issues related to access as well as curriculum design. So each of us has a piece of the puzzle so that we can all be involved in proactive activities that benefit the campus and keep our eye on the big picture. With that way of thinking, then, the vision that we have for universities is that everything is accessible to everybody with no intervention needed from the Disability Resource Center. That's a pretty great vision, isn't it? This priority matrix is a great way to visualize how we spend our time in the Disability Resource Center so that we can focus on the accommodation needs that come in as well as the proactive good design activities that we've been talking about. The first quadrant, quadrant number 1, are things that are urgent and important, and those would be providing accommodations, among other things as well. In our department, we always call that bailing water, because in our busiest times it feels like we're in a boat that's filling with water and we're bailing it out as fast as we can, but it's continuing to come in. Quadrant number 3 are those things that are urgent but not important. So for instance, Maybe you have a deadline to finish a report for somebody across campus, and perhaps it doesn't really have a serious impact on you and what you're doing in your work. So it doesn't feel terribly important to you, but it is urgent and it has to be done. It takes up time. Quadrant number 4 are those things that are not urgent and not important. And we know what those are. Spam, junk mail, Facebook, those types of things that we need to get rid of somehow, delegate, or just cut out of our schedule whenever possible. Quadrant number 2 is the money spot. That's really where we all need to find time to live in at least part of our day every day. That's the area where we focus on the things that are really important but not urgent. These are the things that it's easy to postpone and say you're going to get to later, but you never do. You have to make time for them. If you spend all your time bailing water, then you're not advancing the goals of the department and you're not benefiting your university in a way that is the most helpful. So you need to ask yourself, do I want to spend all day bailing water, or do I want to find the source of the leak and try to plug that up? Because when you do that, by addressing the design issues on your campus, you make the campus more accessible for everybody, and you make the need for individual accommodations decrease greatly, which is going to benefit students tremendously. It'll benefit faculty and staff, and it will absolutely benefit everybody in the disability office. Thank you so much.